Hello, Steelers, and welcome to this very special video tonight when I'm joined by two guests who you may or may not recognise. Well, at least one of them's got a face for radio, if nothing else. One of them appears on podcasts each week on a Monday night on the Plastic Crack podcast. So I'm joined here by Martin from Seventh Son and also Hello. Ken from Yorkshire Gamer. And tonight I thought I'd gather these forces tonight as we were to talk about historical wargaming, and we kind of just want to do a bit of an introduction really to it for people who are probably looking to get into historical wargaming, what you get out of it, where's the fun basically. So I guess without further ado, let both of you introduce yourselves, and let's go with age over beauty. So Ken, do you want to start?
Disgraceful. So those who don't know me, Ken Riley, also known as the Yarkshire Gamer, and I have been gaming for well over 40 years now. I'm in my mid to late 50s, and people are most likely to know me through the Yorkshire Gamer podcast, and that's been going for 3.5 years now. And basically I specialise in large scale, and that's numbers of figures rather than large figures. It is yeah, exactly. 3,000 action men in a pipe bomb. That's something I aspire to. So yeah, I'm pretty old school, but I'm into historical wargaming, and I've tried to bring a bit of fun into the hobby. Having a laugh and a joke on my podcast, and getting rid of wet pallets. That's the other thing I try to do.
But what particular historical periods do you play? I mean, a lot of people say, they play a bit of everything, but I know from your output that you are very centered on several periods. So what are those? Explain those to us.
So over the years, I have had a dip at most things. I suppose Dark Ages, if I can say that anymore.
Not now. There's two archaeologists in here.
It's got
not a chance.
I have to say that the famous historian Michael Wood very, very recently said that he was going to do a lecture on the Dark Ages at Oxford University. So me and Michael, we is bros. Anyway, Italian Wars is probably what I'm mostly known for, which, if people don't know, it's 1494 to 1529, or wherever you want to draw the line on the end of it. And it's kind of that crossover period between twangy things, bows, and bangy things, arquebus and muskets. So it's a very interesting period of history. Huge pipe blocks, massive loads of nobility riding around in armour, thinking they're invincible, and then getting their head blown off by some peasant with an arquebus. So it's that's kind of my number one period. And at the moment, I'm also big into World War II naval. I've got a big project trying to refight the Narvik battles in 1940. And my current show game is Mentana, which is the Italian Risorgimento, which, if you're just new to the hobby, you'll have never heard of, because I hadn't heard of it until about 5 years ago either. And that's Garibaldi and the reunification of Italy, and available to see at a show near you very soon.
And very impressive it is as well. You like a big table, don't you, Ken? But what about you then, Martin? What's your background in historical wargaming, and what periods are you covering?
Well, okay, so yeah, my name's Martin from the channel Seventh Son, which I suppose is what most people would probably know me from, and the fact that I take part, or one of the 4 people in the Plastic Crack podcast. And my sort of wargaming history, I started when I was 12. I just hit 40, so I've still got a way to go yet before I can I can sort of count myself among the venerable elders. But
not very old. They might be older. They're not venerable.
I refer. My main, I guess, interest is in the late 15th century, what everyone will refer to as the Wars of the Roses, or the dynastic conflicts at the end of the 100 Years' War, through to basically the start of the Italian Wars, where chocky things make way for pokey things. So that's sort of where my interest kind of lies. And really, I love it because everyone is horrific to each other. No, I love the fact, even if you're just looking at it from a historical perspective, everyone's got their guy and they're trying to, you know, one up him how he was really loyal. Whereas I just look at it that everyone is horrible, and I think that makes a very ripe ground for wargaming. So yeah, so playing out battles mainly from the Wars of the Roses, lots of sort of what if scenarios as well, because we assumed, because there was so much petty squabbling going on between various lords, that there wasn't always a chronicler around to write it down. There wasn't even one around to write it down when we needed them to write it down. So there was plenty of that. The medieval period is, I guess, my main area of interest. I also am very interested in sort of everything surrounding the First Crusade, but not just simply the Crusaders, but also what's going on with the Byzantines, especially, and what happens directly afterwards in the formation of the Crusader states. I know Ken's got a really nice Crusader states army as well. So yeah, I love all of that, and although I do enjoy a bit of black powder weaponry as well, though those periods I'm not as hot on as the medieval stuff.
Yeah, this is kind of one of the reasons I asked both of you to come along, really, because you kind of cover the areas of wargaming that I don't do, which are, you know, just and I'm sure people who are watching my channel, watching this on my channel, probably already know anyway. I mean, most of my stuff is 20th century up to probably 1945, a little bit more latterly, but up to 1970 with the Vietnam War, but and also Napoleonic. I mean, they're my main areas of interest. So you guys kind of fill in the gaps from my interest a little earlier on and around those things. So I guess the first question I've got for you both, really, and well, this could go anywhere, or may not. It might end very quickly. I mean, so for somebody new to wargaming, somebody new to historical wargaming in particular, is it really just, you know, is it just where venerable elders go to reside, or, you know, what is there in historical wargaming that can that is a hook for people? What's the good thing about historical wargaming? We'll start this time, I reckon. Let's go with you, Martin. I'll jump you straight in.
The thing that draws me to historical wargaming is narrative, non-points based gaming, and losing all of that. And when you stop worrying about lists and points, I think I do it because there are certain systems that require you to do its play, and I'm not. But you know, someone says, "Oh, do you want to have a game with this many points?" and I'll acquiesce normally and go, fine, I'll sort it out. But my preferred method of play is scenario driven, whether that's historical refights or plausible what if scenarios, or sometimes just let's throw everything on the table and see what happens. I think that there's a little bit less pressure. I feel historical gaming is much more rife than narrative gaming and to me casual play, which is what I enjoy with my friends. I mean, gone are the days now where I'll play someone on, say, a Saturday. They'll absolutely table me in a couple of turns, and I'll go home and furiously list build and paint another unit to then try and beat them next week. And then you just have this kind of arms race. Now it's more about actually entertaining ourselves, and obviously with the channel, other people for a day with something that we can all walk away from, even if you lose, which is, you know, it's always nice to win, but also if you lose, you can say, but we had a really good looking game. That's what I like. So we're not worrying about sort of trying to catch this token that's over here, which is some implausible objective, and we don't understand why. Even in scenarios, even in historical games where I require you to do that, I have to bring myself to at least make a hill or something, because just something to be fighting over. So for me, I think I find that there's just I find a lot of inspiration from history to just build a big narrative for games. That's what I enjoy doing.
So you'd say, like, I mean, I probably know the answer to this. I mean, are you happy then playing, say, an asymmetric game, or what a lot of people complain as an unbalanced game? Like, what are your thoughts on that kind of thing?
I'm completely up for playing it, and I think that games can be balanced, if you like, through the scenario rather than through the forces. You know, we just played a large English Civil War game. which is another period that I really enjoy. And I was using a small royalist force defending a village as wave after wave of parliamentarians marched their way up the battlefield. And it was more about how a staggered defense can really hold up a superior attacker and using those defenses. So yeah, an asymmetric game I find a lot of fun. You know, can you do the I'm going to say it, the 300 thing plus some Athenians and hold off, but I think there's a lot of fun to be had there. That being said, there are times where, let's do balanced forces and see who comes out on top. But I really enjoy, and I think what can really suck people in is coming up with inventive scenarios and saying that, you've got this group, you've got reinforcements coming in 5 turns, they're coming, but you've got to hold out for that long to get them. I mean, there's no reason that can't happen in other genres, but it doesn't seem to. Whereas in historical gaming, we seem to be able to, especially with the breadth of history and what's actually occurred, the truth is stranger than fiction. It's the Wars of the Roses.
Get away from a bit, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. There's no need to sort of come up with it. The Wars of the Roses, the Italian Wars, the Crusades, they were horrifically violent, and everything happened in them. There's no need to make stuff up. So you can usually find inspiration, and that's what I quite like doing, is finding a little seed of something, and then building a scenario out of it. In our first Crusade games at the moment, the armies are moving towards a big confrontation at Dorylaeum, and I think most history books just say something along the lines of, they're harassed on the way. But we're going to play out some of those harassing actions and follow the supply trains and make them into a bit of, actually a bit of fun and actually wondering how stuff is going to get there. So I think that could be something to really draw people in, rather than just, 2 armies lined up and you just push them into each other to just capture some tokens in the middle of the table.
Yeah,
for me anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I mean, like you say, the narrative of it, sometimes even if you're going to lose a game, from the outset you're going to lose. It's like, how long can you last until you lose, isn't it? That's the can you do better? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, can you last that extra turn that they did? How about you, Ken? I mean, are you on a similar page with that? I think you probably are, aren't you? But what?
Yeah, I think for anyone new coming to the hobby, they kind of need to decide what they're going to get out of it. Is it, do they want entertainment? In which case you could drink 10 shots of vodka and play Mousetrap. And you really, really would be entertained. Because I'm not saying I've done it, but when I was a student, I might have done it. That when the ball's going round, it's just brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. But then you might, as I do, I've always enjoyed history. I've always enjoyed learning. So that's, to me, is the benefit of historical wargaming, is that I'm constantly learning. Even now in my mid to late 50s, I'm learning about the Italian Risorgimento. I'm learning about Garibaldi. I'm learning about all these amazing things. Now, not knocking fantasy wargaming, but if I was into that, nobody's particularly interested on what the Red Scorpions chapter did in the Babas incident in whatever. Whereas somebody, I might be at a pub quiz. It's tied, and the bonus question is, what island did Garibaldi live on? And I've just won 8 pints of lager now.
Martin and I are both thinking, could we win that quiz? And I know I couldn't.
No, I'm sitting here just trying to not make eye contact with Ken, so he asks.
Capera, if you didn't know. It's one of the Sardinian Islands. Bought it for a very reasonable amount, I have to say. So yeah, it's that learning for me, and that constant education of real life. And we've talked about it in the past, me and you, Alex, about how World War One is exciting enough as it is without goblins involved. So,
should get that as a t-shirt, shouldn't I? Really?
Yeah, exactly. You can learn so much, and you can not only learn so much, but you can experiment with. I've played the Battle of Jutland 7 or 8 times now. Inside out, I know it. I know exactly how the Germans might, with a tiny, tiny chance of winning, but the rest of the time they just get absolutely smashed by the British fleet. and then when you read the history, and I've just done a podcast with Nick Jellicoe, who's grandson of the Admiral of the British Grand Fleet, and everything that we were talking about historically, I've gamed at some stage and realised the consequences of turning towards a torpedo attack. Sitting under the strength of the British line of fire for more than 10 minutes. All those things bring it to life, and some people bring things to life through reading books or watching films. And I think, Martin, you're big into the narrative thing as well, as I am, and you bring the stories to life through moving little miniatures around the table. And I think that's it's a fantastic way to learn and to enjoy.
And again, just to add there, I mean, the narrative again has come up, hasn't it? I mean, your games, are they the things that you play, like what's the name of the big one that you've got going around the shows at the moment? Rigamento? Mentana, sorry. Is that balanced? Is that a competition style balanced game?
Oh no, absolutely. Well, I've balanced it up a little bit, because in the real battle, the Papal States forces went forward, nearly won it. Garibaldi fighting back a bit, and the French went, "We got this new Chassepo thing. What does that do?" Oh, it kills a lot of people, and everyone's run away. So historically, Garibaldi didn't stand a chance, and he was towards the end of his, I'm going to say useful life as a commander, but he was about the same age as me. It's more of a learning thing about history, that particular game, with the knowledge that most of the time the French and Papal States are going to win, but you never know. At Partisan, the Garibaldi won.
Yeah. So you can change the history, can't you? Basically, by just ever so slightly doing something different. And I think that's probably the big thing, isn't it? How well do you do as a commander on the field? You can read the accounts of what happened, and you can actually try to change that history by doing something slightly different, go left instead of right or whatever. And that, I think that is also go on, you were going to say, Ken? And
you can do that, and you can come up with the best master plan in the world, and then either you roll double one or your mate next to you just puts off in a completely different direction.
No plan survives contact with the enemy. It's as old as it is as true, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some of the benefits, I guess. Like like you said, but I suppose we should mention there are, within historical gaming, there is tournaments. I mean, DBA, for example, there's bolt action and things. But you guys, that's not really your thing, is it at all? It's
no.
Definitely not. Yeah, and same here, really. It's worthwhile just mentioning for people if they come from a tournament background, say like 40k or something. There is a tournament scene out there, but I think we all avoid it with a barge pole as long as you can find, really.
We will wean you off it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There are ways.
So there's some of the benefits, but I mean, there is obviously, for somebody who is just starting in historical wargame, what are the difficulties, you said? This time, I'm going to start with you, Ken, this time. What are if you are going from, let's say, most people start wargaming through 40k or through Warhammer because they're on the high streets, aren't they? They're garden walled. You go into a shop, you can buy everything you need, and you can come out and you can be playing that afternoon. You can even be playing in the shop. Historical wargaming is very slightly different, I would argue. So, where do you go? How do you start, even?
Yeah, I think the difficulties of getting into wargaming are they're often played up between the two sections of historical and fantasy.
Martin, if you want to jump in at any time, do so.
Yeah.
I'm directing these questions at each other, but do. Sorry, Ken.
I've only just started.
I'm trying to cut you off as quick as I can.
Could you sense the swear meter? No. So getting into historical wargaming, getting into fantasy sci-fi wargaming, they're quite often pitched against each other, but I think they're very similar in terms of difficulties, in that it's the initial choice of getting into the hobby. Oh, I like miniatures or whatever, or I like history, wherever you're coming from, is quite straightforward. The difficult thing is when you come to go, right, I'm going to buy and then you know, a simple get one of the War Games magazines. There'll be 10, 15 different periods in there, no problems whatsoever. You know, fantasy stuff, you've got Games Workshop, they do, I don't know, 10 different games. Then you've got the likes of Malifaux and all these different other science fiction, fantasy-based games. So I think it sounds daft, but the sheer amount of choice in all types of wargaming is probably one of the most difficult things, especially if you're trying to start out on your own. It's a lot easier, I think, where you've got a group of mates, or you can go along to a war games club and fit in or drop in with a group of people who are already doing something, and then you kind of have that group euphoria then that pushes you on to do whatever you want to do. So yeah, for me, that's the first big difficulty, is that absolutely mind-blowing amount of choice. Even if you choose an historical period, are you going to do 6 mil, 10 mil, 12 mil, 15 mil, 13.75 mil, 20 mil, 28 mil? 10 choices already.
Yeah, I think it's that's one of the main points. But also, when you look at a fantasy game, so if you take things, so let's not look at Games Workshop. Look at say Malifaux. That company produce their own rules, produce their own models, produce their own starters. War Machine, they produce their own rules, produce their own models, produce their own starters. And a lot of fantasy gaming does that. Whereas in historicals, you'll have you've got the likes of say Warlord, who will produce their starters, but historicals is much more like a kit assembly. I'm going to get the rules from here, from this person, so say Velades, but I'm going to source my models from here, and I'm going to, source my term here. Whereas GW and fantasy gaming, you can just buy that package and go. Now, what we are seeing a little bit of that in historicals, Gripping Beast do it successfully, Warlord do it successfully, and that's what their epic lines are. That's what they are. It is big battles. Here it is. So you can go in, you buy that product, and you walk away, and it's essentially a gateway. But traditionally, certainly when I was getting into historicals, I had to, Ken's right, I had to go, right, I want to play bolt action, but I don't want to use these models, so I'm going to go and look at somewhere else. Where am I going to go? And it's just a little bit more effort involved. Whereas when I wanted to play Saga, for example, even at that point, this was way back when I think when the first book came out, and there were 4 bands. You got the book, the rulers, and a metal warband. They all came together, and that was it. You had your starter. And I think companies that can do that to sell their product, you will hook people a lot easier, and it's much easier if you can say, for example, at Salute, if you're going around and you're looking at a game and someone says, I really, they play it right, what do I need? If you can just go, you just need this box, and in it you've got you're good to go. Now with mass battle games, especially at 28 mil, that's quite hard to do, which I get, but if you're doing things at small scale, Bacchus makes some awesome some starter sets with rule books as well. They've got their rules, and I do see quite a lot of people sort of buying those up, and then what they'll do is they've got their armies and they can move on to another rule system if they want to try something else out. So I think that's something where you see a lot of fantasy manufacturers. I can think of two, Warp Miniatures. They have their own game, that Moonstone game, which seems to get a lot of play. And I have some of the miniatures because they're quite whimsical and fun. Remind me of Discworld. I quite like painting them up. Haven't played it, but everything comes as a neat little package produced by the same person. And I think that the historical companies that do that benefit somewhat over the ones who don't.
Yeah, there's quite a number, I think, like you say, really, probably in the last 20 years. I don't know if you noticed this as well, Ken, being a gamer who's been into it for what you said, 40 years at this point. I'd say probably in the last 20 years there's been a real shift towards that battle in a box kind of approach from historical gamers. I mean, even Peter Pig do it. They sell you, a World War I army in a box for 70 quid, and you got everything you need. You don't have to go through their lists. Because I mean, when I started wargaming back in the day, there was nothing like that. Even Games Workshop weren't doing that, I don't think, when I was starting. And it was very difficult to work out what it was you needed from what were pretty much photocopied lists of figures with no pictures. And, you sent off your £2 in your stamped addressed envelope, and about 4 weeks later you get these blobs of metal. you can't even remember what it was you'd ordered. I mean, now, you know, the world is completely different now, and but even then it was overwhelming. And I just think nowadays it is even more overwhelming to be starting in historicals, even, you know, because, like I say, with Warhammer and with Games Workshop, it's, you know, you walk into a Warhammer shop, you can talk to the person behind the store. I mean, obviously they're there to sell you something, but you can come out with something and get a game out of it without having to think too much about it. Whereas, like you said, with historicals, I think even deciding which period of history you want to use, you know, from the 10,000 years of human history that's involved warfare and conflicts, you know, where do you even start? And I guess, you know, what are the things that would pull people? You mentioned films, Ken. I mean, and, you know, history books.
Napoleon, obviously.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, if you want to recreate the trenches of Waterloo, then, you know, crack on. In whichever
telescopic sites.
Telescopic sites, and Napoleon leading charges into battle, you know, that kind of thing. It's just amazing. But, you know, you can do it if you want to. Less said about that.
You know, films and television series are a big draw to some periods of wargaming, and you know, when Sharp was popular on television, good old Yorkshire lad that he was, Richard Sharp. You know, Napoleonic skirmishing takes on board, and you know, there was a period in, I guess, in the early 90s where Vietnam films were bloody everywhere, Hamburger Hill and all those classic Vietnam films, and that stuff, you know, we did Vietnam in that period. It can, you know, but we as individuals are never going to be able to influence that way of bringing people into the hobby. We're slaves to whatever film comes on television. But I think what we do as collectively, not necessarily together, but we do put out content that people can look at. And, you know, if somebody's got an interest in the Wars of the Roses, they'll find Martin's stuff and start working on Wars of the Roses. So that stuff is a lot more accessible. I think it's just once people have got that germ of an idea, they can then, you know, even I can go Garibaldi into YouTube's and comes up with, you know, they're not particularly good, but it comes up with some basic documentaries or histories or whatever, and I might get hooked on that, or, you know, I might see one of your World War I videos, Alex, and think, oh wow, yeah, that's exactly what I want. So it's just getting that first funnel to narrow you down, and once you're there, I think there's resources out there so much more than, you know, when I were a lad. And you had
when they're writing on under candlelight. You
didn't even have War Games magazine. You had 4 or 5 pages in military modelling, and that was it. So yeah, it's there, and it's that vastness of choice, I think, is the thing that people will struggle with.
What about you, Martin? What do you think? I mean, where would you look to draw people into the thing? I mean, obviously, one thing is got to mention is YouTube, and Ken's already mentioned it. Your channel is pretty big at this point, and, you know, you get some good views on your things about Roses, and I'm fairly sure.
I think just before Martin starts, can I say that these two, their channels is massively bigger than mine. So if you've got haven't got anything to do, subscribe to me.
Yeah, subscribe again.
Yeah.
Don't need it.
Welcome to Thomas Deal, sponsored by the Yorkshire Gamer.
All views expressed on this.
My game at Partisan was sponsored by you because you left your bloody dice trays on my table.
You still haven't sent them back to me.
Free advertising, that. Sorry, Martin.
No. I think. I mean, with my games, I tried to show that I was trying to get rid of the, I hate this term, but I'll use it anyway, you know, the fuddy-duddy idea of historical gaming. Now, the fact that my wife likes playing it, like, she doesn't really care about history. I mean, she cares about history, but she doesn't care enough that she would pursue. But she likes playing the games, and you know, she's up for having those games. So, you know, I'm not going to pass that up. So that helps, and I think that helps in a way that just shows that, you know, they are accessible. They are accessible. Now, I I personally, I think we talked about this before, actually, at all three of us actually at CrackCon. We change our games and the way that we sort of present them based on who we're doing to. So if you've got a whole bunch of new people, you're not going to sit there and deep dive into the history. All they need to know is why they're there and who they're fighting and why they hate them. But if you do have someone who then says, you know, I was really interested in that, so then they get that little seed and they go and do a little bit of research. With my channel, that's what I tried to do, and I think people, especially with the Wars of the Roses, they have this sort of preconceived idea of what it is, and they always say, "Oh, it's where two counties fought each other," and I get a bit eggy. And of course, the problem is with at the moment is if you type Wars of the Roses into YouTube, it always comes up with Richard III and the last 2 year or his 2 year reign, which is interesting, but from a wargaming point of view, apart from Bosworth, nothing happened really. You know, there was a couple of rebellions, but it's probably the most, I'm going to get flamed for this, probably most boring part of the whole of a, you know, 30, nearly 40 year, you know, set of conflicts. It's not one consistent piece of warfare. It's all just, you know, dynastic conflict. It's just some bursts of conflict, and then it would calm down a little bit, and someone would murder someone else, and it'd all kick off again. The rest of it is so much. With the earlier period, you know, where there was, you know, just successive battle and then a siege and then action. That was really interesting. That last bit always seems to get people into the Wars of the Roses. To go and read about, for example, Richard and what's happened, which is irrelevant to gaming in a way, but it gets people hooked, and they look at Bosworth, which again I would argue is one of the more less interesting battles, even though there were pikemen at it, but they were from France, and, you know, whatever. And then they start to look at other things. So what I wanted to do was just show with my channel how you can sort of build up some of these games. So because I was constrained by space, especially in my old place, I could only really get 6x4, but I didn't want that to put people off, because I love playing big games. Like when I see Ken's games, all I want to do is just give up on what I'm doing is just go and play. But not everyone has that. But I didn't also, I wanted to sort of show how people could build towards it and have games. But again, by altering the scenarios, by having waves of troop entering the battle, or if you're trying to do a refight, just do one flank. And, you know, you could play 3 separate actions, and, you know, and even get multiple people involved to play different games and come up with an alternative. So we've done quite a few things, and I've tried to vary the scenarios and the things that I do on the channel to be interesting, just basically to show people. And I get emails from people saying, "Oh, I tried this with this, maybe you should do that." I'm like, well, that's great. I'm probably not going to play it again, but I think that's a really good idea. And now you said that, I might do something like that in the future. And I tried to show it also as well that you don't have to be sort of slaves to the rule books. Nothing's going to happen to you if you don't follow a certain rule. You know, they're not going to come and get you, despite what GW like people to think. If you don't do something to a certain way, they're not going to come and get you. That being said, you know, I've had some great games with some GW games sort of in the past. I haven't played any for quite a long time. But for example, we just played a game, a Wars of Roses game that's based around the final few hours in the Second Battle of St. Albans, when the Yorkists have already been beaten. So it's essentially a tactical retreat, and you're trying to get off the battlefield without basically any more losses. If it makes you feel better, they weren't proper Yorkists. It's technically the Nevilles. The Yorkists were over in, you know, they were winning at Mortimer. They were beating the Welsh, Mortimer's Cross. But I nicked that mechanic, the timer mechanic from Acton Panzer, which I quite liked. This sort of, you know, so I have used timers before, but I quite liked the way it is. So I borrowed it and changed it a little bit. I've just put it into a Hail Caesar game. And I just like, and you know, you guys have already seen, I can't leave them alone. I need to sort of adjust rules and adjust stat lines. And I think once you realize that you can do that, and nothing's going to happen, you can make the game your own. Everything becomes a lot more freeing, and you can't really, or I've never really heard of anyone in a, forgive me if this is wrong, to say in a fantasy game messing with a stat line because they don't like it. They wait for an errata, they wait for an FAQ to come out, because, you know, people will say, but that's how it's written. Well, I don't want that. I want this unit to be wavering at the start of the game because they've just fought a huge battle and their numbers are dwindling. You know, I like universal special rules in games. The special rules is maybe a wrong term, maybe something like conditions that you can just throw into a game and maybe it acts as a balancing factor, but you can say, right, we're playing this this is what we did. We're playing this battle in the there's already been a huge conflict. One side, the Yorkists, had to basically see if their troops if there was any shock amongst their troops, you know, because they've been fighting all day and they're on the retreat. So with my channel, I just like to show that there's, you know, you can have some fun with it, have a laugh. And if it doesn't work, well, just don't do it next time. As long as you had a good time playing. I mean, I can think on the channel, there's twice where I haven't put out a game because the game just didn't work. it just went wrong from start to finish. One of them was when we played a scenario as written, and it was just it just like, well, you know, it just didn't work. So we're not having fun. If we're not having fun, then the people watching this aren't going to have fun. Yeah. So why would if anything, it's going to, and it's a system I like, but this scenario needs more work. Yeah. So we're actually going to come back to that. We've changed it. I might have. I did sort of say to the author, because he sent me some stuff to review. I was sort of like, I'm going to do this, but it didn't really work. Do you mind? And he said he was fortunately he was very open to it. He's like, no, break it, change it. And then there was another one where it was one of those games where it just nothing works from start to finish. So it just looked awful. But yeah, so that's the sort of the point of the channel, is to show that alternative ways of playing it and not worry too much about what the rules say, but as long as, you know, not worry about changing something just to suit the way you're gaming. You should have a go. Nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think a similar question to you, I guess, Ken, or at least, you know, what's your thoughts on it because you mentioned magazines and all these different things. Your podcast is very broad in its scope for historical gaming, and I know you do, you know, it's big gaming, but it is pretty much historical gaming, isn't it? Yeah. And I see that kind of almost as a magazine approach, because each episode is very different, but it's set around a theme. But there's no, apart from big battles, there's no particular theme through your podcast. And I mean, you know, is that a good way to get people again interested in history? There's things. Let me just finish this though. There's things that, you know, I've listened to on your podcast that I'd never even considered before gaming. Yeah, and it's stuff like, you know, I probably wouldn't go and game it, but it might be something enough, you know, that's going to spark somebody to who is starting. Do you think that's is that a good approach from your point of view for people to get into it? And I'm going to say, obviously, go and listen to Ken's podcast.
I hope so, because that's what I do.
Get the podcast viewer.
So one thing I've never done is I've never chased likes and chased listens. So it's very easy to pick the Wargames glitterati, or, you know, I'll just say Rick Priestley. It seems that every new podcast that starts, Rick Priestley's one of the first guests on there, and you know, nothing against Rick.
He's a man who doesn't have to do much, does he? Really?
Exactly. I don't particularly like his sets of rules, so I'm not going to go, come on the show, Rick. I'm going to tear your rules to pieces for 2.5 hours. It's not going to be very interesting. So, I have wide-ranging and varied historical taste. So, I try and get people who haven't necessarily been on a podcast before, and try how the podcast has got as popular as it has. I'll never know, because who else is going to do 2 hours on paintbrushes? who else is going to do a 4-hour special on Jutland? This is commercial suicide for some sort of. If I was making money, you know, I'd be half the size I am now. If that was my sole method of income. But I think that you know, enthusiasm for what you're doing is the key. You know, Martin loves the Wars of the Roses, and that comes across in his videos. If he did something about something he was completely uninterested in, I'm sure that would come across. Yeah. And it's the same with me.
There's a couple on there. There's a couple on there. You have to. I'm not going to say which ones are. You have to wheedle them out, but they are on there.
Yeah, I've got a couple of videos like that as well.
if I did a podcast on choosing the best army for a bolt action tournament, I'm gonna be bored off my tits within 10 minutes, and it's just gonna be. Whereas Whereas the Jutland one with Nick Jellicoe, I'm so into it. I've got no idea. I've done 4.5 hours. So whatever you choose to do, I think that's a top tip for a newcomer, is to do what you like and what you're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Well, I guess then I guess one of the other big problems with not a problem, but a stumbling block with historical wargaming is there is a vast amount of information out there, but where do you start? Where do you start with looking into it from a research point of view? The actual history of things, or we kind of said you don't really need to. You could just come along and play a game or whatever. But if you are interested in history, I mean, both of you, you've chosen relatively obscure periods of history. I mean, one of my big ones is Second World War, and that's probably the thing that's been written about the most. So you could find also, you could, when you're waiting for your aeroplane, you can pick up a James Holland book, can't you? Just in the W.H. Smiths, but you can't really do that for Garibaldi's wars or for, the early parts at least of the Wars of the Roses. Maybe you can get something on Richard III, but what about these weird characters that hang about in the
what we need to do is we need to start a series of children's books along the Mr. Men. So we could have Mr. Garibaldi, the revolutionary.
I think there's some out there actually. I was looking at my daughter's Mr. Men books, and I think some of them could be renamed quite successfully.
Probably only in Italian though, at least. Big translation.
I think. I mean, with the Wars of the Roses, I find it actually easier introducing newcomers to the Wars of the Roses than I do, say, historical gamers who are maybe used to Napoleonics or World War II. Because, so for myself, I find World War II a massive headache because of the amount of information and the uniforms. Whereas with the Wars of the Roses, there's and certainly, and obviously, the further you go back, we are less well served by sources. And as soon as people start arguing, you can kind of do what you want, because no one's going to argue. Because ultimately, a peasant is going to wear, whatever, and you can kind of get away with it. But so when someone new comes along, I mean, they are of varying quality, but I do generally point people towards the Osprey books because they will give you a good grounding. The plates are usually very nice, and certainly some of the later ones, more recently, have been very good. And then there's obviously new books by Hellion and Pen and Sword, and they're coming out. But when I have someone who rigidly wants to know uniforms, when you have to kind of break it to them that, especially in the medieval period, that it's not very well served. They have livery, but not everyone wears livery. But you could have a livery jacket, but then they might wear a bend or a sash that has someone else's livery on it at the same time. And then you've got to explain the difference between a banner, a standard, and a livery flag. And a coronet, and they will just sit there looking at you guys like, just give them a flag. Just fortunately for the Wars of the Roses anyway, and I know Ken makes good use of one of the sets, which is the Perry the late mercenary set, which sort of straddles the period. Their information leaflet that you get in there is very good and would give anybody a good grounding in the start of it. You get some flags, you get some basic colours and some badges, and this is what this city wore, or this is what this lord's livery looked like, and you go from there, and then people kind of sort of grow off of that. The internet is a blessing and a curse. Some, you see people, they'll post things and paint things, but I would never criticize or offer criticism unless someone was asking for it on what they've done uniform wise or livery wise. If someone says to me, I found this, is this right? I'd say, well, you got that source, but maybe you should look here, and this source said this. I'd never outright comment on something and go, that's wrong, because they might be painted lovely, but unless I found it was some personal affront to some character that I liked. But no, you're right. When you're digging into these absolute bastards of the 15th century, you can go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and at the end of it, you kind of come out and you go, And what color am I doing them still? I don't know. All I know is that he killed his wife, he killed his sons, he married someone else, took all their lands, but I still don't know what color sash he wore at the Battle of St. Albans. Doesn't help that they all have the same names as well. It's like George, Richard, Henry, and Edward. And it just goes around. Even John Paston, I was doing so about Norfolk. He's got John Paston named 2 of his sons John. So
2 of them.
I mean, that's Norfolk, but yeah. I generally point people towards the sort of Osprey or just the information leaflet. Sometimes you get in those wargaming boxes, and then if it takes, then you can sort of point them at some more.
Again, I think that's something relatively new. The information leaflets. I mean, I've noticed it with the Warlord Epic stuff. Like they have a little 2-page, 4-page painting guide, and it just describes little bits and pieces about it's like enough to get you started, isn't it? And I think that's always good, really. What about you, Ken? What are the difficulties with looking into the Italian wars, for example, or for any of the the obscure wars that you're interested in? There's a lot of stuff about Jutland, for example, but how much of it is useful?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Jutland is it's 100 years plus ago, and people are still debating large sections of the battle and decisions made in the battle. And history, as it does with all sorts of things, look at Richard III and how he's been treated over various periods of times. And Jutland's the same. The BT Jellicoe battle between the charging forward and the steady line of battleships, it's a question that's still debated today and will be debated for a long time, because it's such a massive part of our history. But I think there's so much out there to learn and so much to get your head round that sometimes you just have to go, you know what, I've made my decision. People can fire, right? I don't care what you say. People can fire crossbows from horseback.
Yes.
Right. So the big windy last one, you have to put that in the ground. That's fired by footmen. The one where you go like that and like a ratchet and pull it back, you can fire it from a horse. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. Them little wild boars that run around the forest. So there you go. So, but there'll be 18 people on the internet will go, you're wrong. And at some point, you just have to go, you know what? You're an idiot. And I know I'm happy.
Yeah.
With what I've got.
Yeah. Like you say, I think for a lot of those kind of things, you can find arguments for and against, especially the earlier you go back in time. But like some of the more obscure wars that you're interested in, like Garibaldi, I suppose it's not particularly obscure in Italy, but here in the UK where we're based, I think it's relatively unknown at least.
And it's still I've been talking to some Italian gamers over recent years, and it's not played that often in Italian wargaming circles either. It's relatively minor period for them as well. And I think this is probably not a plus for somebody just starting, but for me, doing these obscure periods in different countries, it's as I said at the very start, I've been doing this for a very, very long time, so I could probably recite most of the Waterloo Order of Battle without thinking about it. So I'm looking for new things. Because I enjoy the process of learning. And, with the Garibaldi projects especially, I've had to search all over the place, even to get a basic map of the Battle of Mentana. And I'm looking at another battle now, the Battle of Volturno, which when the Bourbons were involved. So it would be Bourbons versus Garibaldi.
all the biscuits.
Oh, the biscuits. I can see the graphic now. I can see the banner. Yeah.
Well, I found one map online, and that's not a particularly good one. So it's kind of the joy of going back to how it was when I was younger, when I had to search for everything, which is, probably not what people want these days. They want that instant access to the information. Whereas I quite enjoy with these obscure periods, and kind of why I'm drawn to them now is it's something different. as we spoke about at York, Alex, nobody's coming to the table and go, I think you'll find that that's wrong. And
Yeah.
You don't know anything about this, do you? You don't know whether that hat's right or wrong.
Yeah, if you get a Second World War German soldier's tunic wrong, then people will tell you. But yeah.
Oh yeah, I discovered that quite very how should we say definitively when I was painting up a 15mm British tank commander to stick out my 15mm tank. I posted it, and I'll never be posting it there again. Bloody hell, Jesus Christ!
But I think like this show's geared towards newer people. I think the most important thing is not to be put off by people like that.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
they're a minority and a vocal minority.
You do tend to find, and obviously I'll just speak from the PCP group, that most groups sort of self-police, and if someone does sort of do that, there'll often be 4 or 5 people that will suddenly be sort of pipe down, ignore this tit, let's just get out there because and we always say, and ultimately at the end of the day, they are your models, and you paint them your way. But if people want to come to you, and I think that's it, if you can. There are certain gateway, I hate that term, but gateway games, gateway periods, bolt action being one of them. I'd argue Saga as well, because Saga is this kind of strange beast where it's a skirmish game, and it's the Dark Age at that time, the early medieval. But it's also got this sort of, the whole point is it's a saga. It's meant to be like Beowulf. Your warlord is meant to be able to run through a unit of people, whereas in reality he'd be spiked and paraded around. But it brings people in, and they can kind of just do a little bit of what they want. And in bolt action, they can paint them as detailed as they want, or they could just paint them German field grey and whack them on the table, and then that gets them into it. And then from that, they then look into something, a little bit more. Maybe they start looking into sort of a smaller scale, and then they want to place, they want to play something at 15mm, or they go, well, I've now done. I fancy doing the Norman Conquest 1066. We've seen a chap on the Benjamin on the plastic crack thing that's done this huge 1066. He's Danish. He hand painted sort of 2,500 shields. The lunatic, but he sort of took that from his initial interest. It just expanded and expanded. Yeah. So I think that there's something to be said certainly for these games. Now, I don't particularly like some of those games. They don't speak to me, but I did, and then I found other things that I wanted to do. And I think that's kind of sometimes what you have to do is, if you have someone new to the hobby, do you get them to play the game that you like, or the game that got you into the hobby?
I think that's actually it's a good thing to follow up on, actually, thinking about it, because rules for historical wargaming are many and varied, aren't they? I mean, you touched on a couple there. Some of the bigger ones, like Saga, would probably be the biggest one for the early medieval period, for example. And
is that the Dark Ages?
Some might say
the unclear time. Yeah,
Michael Wood would say.
So that is definitely an intro game, isn't it? And bolt action is also similar for the Second World War. I would argue that the black powder is for Napoleonics, or those periods. Hail Caesar for the ancients. But there are a huge amount, absolutely probably uncountable amounts of rules that have been published. And they're published ones as well. They're not the ones that people have just written that they play in their clubs. I mean, how do you go around that minefield? I mean, Ken, this must be something that I know you stick with rules and have done for since day dots, haven't you? Pretty much, you're still using Charles Grant's rules, aren't you?
Yeah, good lad. Knew what he was talking about.
Charles Grant?
Yeah, I've talked about this recently on another interview that I did, and when you
this is not your first interview. What?
It's not my first sheepdog trial. One of the catchphrases from the show there. I think I've just spoke. Like I said, I just spoke about this in another podcast, and I was talking about how rule complexity goes down with time, and that might not be the way that you're thinking that I'm saying it, but I've got lads who I know who've played in the Grand Manor for 30, 40 years since it came out, and they can basically, if you say 6 figures on a 2, they will tell you how many casualties that's caused. And there's like an A4 page casualty table, and they basically know it inside out because of familiarity. And we're in a period at the moment where rule sets are coming and going very, very quickly. And you don't get to that point where you know it all. And quite often the best way, and this might sound really daft, but the best way to get into a set of rules is to not know them at all. And just turn up at a table with some lads and lasses who know what they're doing and what they're talking about and how to play the game, and just go, oh, right, Alex, I want to move that group of men over that field into that hedge there. What do I need to do? And you play the narrative. I'm going all lardies here, aren't I? Playing
the period, not the rules.
That's it. That's the one. I do have to pay Rich £5 now. I've said
you do, yeah. Or I have to at least. This is on my channel, so I'm going to pay.
Exactly. But that's the way to enjoy the game, is to enjoy that narrative and not get too involved. I don't think in what paragraph 7 1.2.4b says. Exactly when Private Jenkins trips over a can of beans next to a lamppost, then this happens. You draw people in by getting them enthusiastic about a game, and then hopefully they get to that position where they become you, if you like. They're the person, because you always have people who are, maybe a little bit more outgoing, who run games. My mate Andy Dickinson, when he does, we did a BattleTech display at Hammerhead participation. I ain't got a clue what's going on, but he's got loads of people around his table, and he's, they're loving it, and he's, roll 2-6, you need this, and that's what I would rather have people draw into, rather than going, right, I need to play Bolt Action 4. Is it 3? 4? 3's coming out, isn't it?
3's coming out.
Yeah, 3. Or I need to play Chain of Command. I would rather people go, I need to play World War 2. Alex, will you show me?
And not really worry about the rules. Yeah. I get that. And I think, go on.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, it's just reminded me there really to mention the CrackCon. We've already mentioned it in passing, but Martin, do you want to expand on that? That's one of the things I guess that CrackCon tries to do.
It is, yeah, it is. The whole idea was, originally the idea was COVID's ended. Let's all get together and play a game. But it's what we like to do. We have the spaces so people can organise their own private games. But our main one is to have people showcase essentially the systems and the games that they want. And both of you have run games. I run games there every year. And this year, Dom and I are doing a big one. We're doing the Battle of Kogovia, where Caesar got spanked by the Gauls, which is going to be quite fun. So we're actually going to have a battle in 2 phases. So we're going to have the Romans advancing on the first phase, and it's going to be all changing. And they're going to be running in the second phase. Yes, it is. It's very much an idea, because we have people just turn up, and people do sign up for those games. And I would say, for the vast majority of the time, 75% of the people haven't played before those games. Ken, I know when you put on your large game and took over half the ground floor, the sign-ups, I don't think, I think you said, knowledge of the rules is nice if you know it, but not required. I'll show you what you need to. And loads of people signed up. Alex, you run Chain of Command, and you've done O Group, and you've regularly got people who just want to try it. And yeah, that's what we try to do. For the last couple, last time I demoed a fantasy Japanese mythological skirmish thing, just because I thought, this will be something that I can walk away from, because a couple of people play it, and I ended up doing it all bloody day, which was great. But at the same time, I thought, I want to go and see other tables. We invite people to, game designers to come and show off, and every year now we've usually got somebody demoing. So we had the latest Gangs of Rome they were there, so people were throwing tegula at each other, or you know, sort of poking people with big sticks off of things. This year we got the ruckus thing, so Wars of Roses trying to steal someone's pig and then run off, you know, the battlefield in a different direction. So no, part of it is so that people can just come and try games with somebody who is enthusiastic and wants to show it off, and it's as much for the people learning and as it is for the person who's showing it off, because they know, if you're excited about a game and you want to run a game, come along and show it off. Show us why we should be excited. You know, and so far I don't, but because obviously we get feedback, but pretty much I don't think any of it's been unwanted, or unless Dom's not shown me it. But everyone enjoys it. You know, there's people who have played. We had like was it the 90? I can't remember what it was now. Sort of 1960s, 1970s style thing that was going on, and that was great fun. There was it Nimitz was being played as well, which just like sucked a load of people in. So yeah, I think if you're enthusiastic about any system or period, and you can get that across to people, even if they've got no interest or initially no interest in that period, you'll change minds and you'll get people, you know, involved.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's down to the people playing the games, isn't it, to really to push that message forward. Really,
you've got to sell it. You've got to sell it. It's the same as archaeology. It's just you've got to try and sell archaeology to people. You know, you know, I was fortunate enough that the people who taught and trained me were quite enthusiastic. If I you know, unfortunately, sometimes what you see on the TV, you listen to people, it's so dry. You think, how are we actually going to survive as a profession? But that's obviously for another day.
We'll do that.
I think if you could do an experiment and you had 10 people 20 people interested in history, and you sat 10 down of them at a table with Alex running a chain of command game, and then you set another 10 in a dark room with a copy of Chain of Command and some figures, and said, work it out yourself. Yeah, guarantee the ones who are playing, a vast majority of them are going to be more interested in carrying on the hobby. And let's face it, rule books in the main are dull as dishwater.
Yep.
They are absolutely. I'm trying to think now if I've ever read.
Oh, I love them. I think they're great.
They've got better. They've got better over the years. But
yes, there are some terrible ones if you go back in the day. I mean, yeah, like you say, copy editing is much better these days than it was 30 years ago. My God.
But you try, those people, and I've spoken to rule writers in the past. There's a very fine line to tread between a sort of free-running narrative style game, which in certain periods, like Ancients particularly, the vast majority of people who play Ancients play competition games, play points, play the thing that drives me mad, the moving the hills around the table in the kind of godlike manner. So they've got to cater for that as well. And that can, sometimes... Simon Hall, who wrote Meg, who I think are a really good set of rules. But there is bits in that are very designed towards competitions that I haven't even read them yet. I've just gone moving hills, not interested. Game turn, right? I'm off.
Yeah, I get that. I get that completely. You were going to say something there, Martin. Sorry, I think
No. I was just turning around looking at my my rule book stash up there, I agreed.
This is one of the. Good. I was going to say one of the difficulties, I guess, is with rules, is because there's so many of them. They are of varying qualities, and everybody learns completely differently. Some people will like to like charts, some people like just to read it as a report, some people will like to read it as almost like a novel in some cases. And I think this is the problem, isn't it, when you're trying to cater for all these different things, and invariably wargaming is complex because there are so many variables within the game. Go on, sorry, Martin.
No, I was just saying, because one of the things, and I think we talked about this before in a piece of it, I know I talk about it with my friend Robin, is that when people sort of, the idea that, for example, that fantasy and sci-fi gaming is somehow less complicated. It's like if you've seen the Warhammer rulebook, it's huge. I've got it down. It is massive. You know, the number of mechanics and the level of, you know, what I call crunch that is going on there, because that's the game it's geared towards. I kind of veer away from that. So when I start seeing that in rulebooks, historical things, you know, crunch, you know, where there's lots of cross-referencing of statistics and things, I start to sort of go like that. I'll play them, but there's sort of like warning signs. Like, no, I want to play it, and I'm one of these people who learns better by playing a game. But I was thinking, because there was this big cry out a few years ago for examples, especially in the historical gaming rulebooks. I want to see examples. I want to see a page where someone's playing a turn. And now I kind of feel in the rulebooks that I'm seeing at the minute, it's almost an oversaturation of examples, and rather than what I thought was quite good in a couple of rules, and where you would have the rules, and then, for example, you'd have a couple of example games in a separate chapter. Now it's all like, here's a combat example between 2 units, here's a combat example between multiple units, here's a combat example between, you know, we're here, and you're just like going, but the rules are spread around that. It's like, no, I just succinctly want the rules, then show me the example, and I can go to them and find it. But like you say, it's all personal taste. It does seem to be a move I'm seeing. Maybe this is something because you two have been doing it longer than me, that you maybe noticed, is that there seems to be a lot of, in my opinion, games that are coming out where they publish a system book, and then they'll release, obviously, their supplements around it, so you can play different periods. I'm thinking of things like Saga, for example, that have their main rules, and then you have the Crusades, the Viking Age, the Greeks, where you can have 4 hoplites on their own doing stuff, and it goes through it like that. And personally, that frustrates me a little bit, because I quite like having all the rules in one volume. I get the idea of expansions. I like it, you know, but only when they're sort of expanding on base rules, not where you have like a whole new sort of section. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's something that started to appear. I've started seeing it with multiple sort of systems. I get
that, and I'm in two minds about it, because whenever anybody does anything and produces a book with extras, people always jump on it and say it's rampant consumerism. It's with the thing with historicals. Let's say Saga, because it covers such a large area of time. Sorry, it's a large period of time, from, you know, the early medieval to arguably up to, you know, the later medieval, which is another period, not the Dark Ages. Because of that, because you've got so much difference in the forces, you can't put all that into one book, and so you either have a book that, you know, is quite small, and then you buy another book to add on to that, or you have a single book that is 800 pages long, of which you will probably only use 100 pages if you'll go one particular, you know, you're doing one particular thing. I
think sorry, just because my take sort of, I reviewed on Bloody Ground quite recently, that they sent over, and their sort of way to do, they're going to be covering multiple periods, but so they release their period specific book, but it has the main rules in every single one, even though those chapters are exactly the same, book to book. They are there. So if you wanted to play the Reconquista, was one of them, you just buy the Reconquista book, and the rules for the system are there, and then the Reconquista. Okay, that's a really good way of doing it. You know, the other one was the Norman Conquest, and I think the next one that's coming out is Republic of Rome, for example, early Republic of Rome. So you would buy that. That was sort of my sort of thing, because I actually, you know, game designers got to make money. That's how they're going to carry on making rules. Absolutely. But I quite liked their way of doing it, which is, you know, so you could have someone come along and say, oh, you know, what do I need to buy? Instead of going, well, you've got to go buy that rule book and then that expansion, just buy the Reconquista. The rules are in the front, and the army list for the Reconquista period are in are there, and any period specific rules. I mean, that's a really good way of doing it, especially for that period, because again, those rules cover quite a large time period, don't they? And lots of different armies are doing different things at different times in that period. But I think with something like, to kind of go back to what you say, I mean, with the Second World War, for example, I think that the rules should have at least a basic set of lists.
in them, so you don't have to buy a second book. And for the Second World War, arguably that's going to be Germany, Britain, America, probably the Soviets. Those four. And if you haven't got those in, then your Second World War book is failing, as far as I'm concerned, or your rules books are. It becomes problematic when you just have the rules and then there's nothing else to support it. I think rules should, at least for beginners, at least have an army that they can build and an army that it can fight. In those rules. But yeah, I don't mind the expansions so much, because I think
I think you hit it there. Is you should be able to play the game to see if you like the game before investing more and then taking it further and going more in depth. And that would also count for things like research and things. Let's make sure I'm actually like this period. Someone might want to look at Edo period in Japan and build something, and then before they dive into the research, just go, well, I've got this rule set. Let's see if I actually like this set first, and go from there.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Ken? What's your take on expansions on rules? Because I mean, again, you're pretty old school, where those kind of things didn't really exist, did they? I don't think. Not for a long time. I've
come into in recent years where there's been like a core rule set of which other periods have been sort of put on around it, and I think the Hail Caesar pike shot, black powder, what's coming in a minute. Those, and the problem I found with that is that I didn't find them unique enough to give me, and one of the big things that's always difficult to find in wargaming is period flavor. Everyone's different, but I would be playing Hail Caesar and think I was playing pike and shot, or playing black powder and trying to do something that's in Hail Caesar, and they just blur into one because the mechanisms are so simple, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but they blur into one. And I think the big thing that annoyed me with that was the 40 quid for the book, or 30 quid for the book, and then another 40 quid for the Caesar 411 BC or whatever, and then another book for Macedonia and all that, and you needed those books for that particular thing. So you were, for a beginner, you're 80 quid in before you've even started. And then period rule sets that go outside of their period is a massive bugbear of mine.
Whatever could you be talking about?
Never mind the bell hooks, done wonders for Wars of the Roses, which, let's face it, is a very minor war in the European scene of things. With all the French wars of religion and the Italian wars and all those sorts of things going on, to then stick 6 pages on and say this is the Italian wars, I'm still shaking from that. But it's when you try and shoehorn stuff in that isn't even related to it, that's when I think it becomes difficult. And then you're into that forever circling argument of playability versus historical accuracy. Are you just playing a game, or are you trying to recreate the Italian wars? Are you having 12 figures in a pipe chip, or are you having 14,000 men in a pipe block? It's not. It's a game. It might be a great game, but it's not reflecting what that period of history and the tactics of the period were all about.
No, and I said something very similar in a comment on my latest video where someone decided to pipe up, and I just said, as gamers and we do research, historians, whether that's professionally or just amateur, just for our games, we have to accept a level of compromise between historical accuracy, playability, and also just getting the bloody things on the table and having a game. I mean, an example is obviously there's the new epic line coming out with the Romans all very, very squashed together with their shields, and I know it's angered some people, but at the end of the day, I find it no more silly than having 24 28mm models representing a French battalion that are spread out and essentially in skirmish order. You know, we all accept levels of compromise. All of the units we look at, except for maybe Ken's because they're essentially at 1-to-1, are abstractions of what is actually there. When I put my wars, I've lost track of the number of comments and emails and messages I've had where, because in the way I field my Wars of the Roses units, I like to throw in Billman and Bowman into these units, and people are going, oh, they didn't mix their units. Yes, they did. No, they didn't. And there's just me going, for the scale of gaming I'm playing, it just represents all of the household troops. Billman, you know, retainers, Bowman. It's just a representation. That's all it is. There isn't 1-to-1. There aren't guys on the flank sitting there sniping with bows. I've just put them there because I thought it looked nice on the table, basically. And I like to do diorama basing and things, so you know, I like to have, you know, a little scene going on next to it where someone's getting shouted at for not advancing. So I think that can be quite hard sometimes when you're getting new people into it, when they're coming from systems and games, if it's from, say, fantasy and sci-fi, where it's 1-to-1, you know, one Space Marine, one whatever. Even in Saga and Bolt Action, it's one guy's one model, you know. But when you start to go, well, this, you know, it's a base, or you know, you're dealing with frontages in which you go, well, the actual number of people on them doesn't matter. People start to get a bit wavy, but I find that very freeing in a way as a war gamer, because you can put as many as you like on. You know, you can have your big hedge of pikes that's there, or you could do something interesting with your skirmishers and have them spread out, firing, do some fencing. And I think certainly with historical gaming, you can do more from the modeling aspect. I really do. I mean, I know in fantasy and sci-fi you could do some awesome things with lighting effects and power swords and lightsabers and flamethrowers, but I like building a scene on a base with, like, the guys sneaking into a camp and, you know, taking out the sentry and use them as objective markers or something on the table. And there's nothing to stop you doing that in those other type of games, because those games are so prescriptive in the way that their systems work. You wouldn't be able to use them. You could make a scene base, but you wouldn't be able to use it. So I think that can be attractive to some people, and also can put some people off. I think it's a benefit and a deficiency, isn't it? I guess, you know, because it's difficult getting your head around 24 figures representing 800 men, like you say, as a battalion. But for a lot of us, we take it. For those of us who have done historical wargame for a long time, you take it as granted, really. You know, you see 24 figures, you go, right, okay, that's a battalion. It has its own language, which newcomers probably just don't understand, I guess. You know, go on, Ken.
I think it's kind of important to realise that people grow into the hobby and come in with habits from whatever game they've played in the past, and it's more about encouraging people to get involved more. And then if people want to be more historically accurate as opposed to playing the game, then, you know, you should encourage that debate around it. But I'm never keen on people going, that's wrong, that is, that's rubbish. Because when you first start, you don't really know, so you're trying the best that you possibly can. But then, you know, I would consider myself to be quite you know, I do a lot of research before I do a project, and if I do something, I do it for a reason. So, but I still get it, you know. Those colours aren't right for that Bandai Pike block. Yes, I know it's a Bradford City shirt from 2023. And with the Italian Risorgimento, there were various Italian flags throughout the independence period and linked to various different areas. And what I've done is I've used them on table so that Brigadier has a type of flag and all the people in his unit have the same flag. Next brigade, one flag, all the same. Now, historically, they probably wouldn't be on the same battlefield at the same time, although Garibaldi did nick most of his stuff, so you never know where it came from. But I've done it for a reason. I've done it so that people who are coming and playing the game don't know anything about it. So you go, that officer with that flag commands those with the same flag, and that officer with that flag commands those with, and the different. Oh, I get that. Yeah. So I've deliberately done it, and then people go, "Oh, you need to check your flags." just go away. I know. It's like people expect me to do absolutely zero research and just turn up with a 12x6 table with 1,000 figures on. I've just knocked them up. I've not looked at colours. I've not looked at figures. I've just gone on the internet and gone War Games figures, and I've gone, I'll have 30 of them. No, I've done a shitload of research. So, for new people, doesn't matter how long you've been in the hobby, there's always some. Can I say Belland? I've just said it.
Yeah.
On there, who's going to turn around and go, I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
Yes, I had it just recently in a game of the Far East I was playing with Japanese tanks. I was told that they weren't those particular tanks on that particular battlefield, but I don't care. I really don't care. It doesn't matter. It was the game I was enjoying.
I went slightly the other way recently because I was painting up a new command base for this Wars of Roses game. And I thought, no, I'm going to use it. I've got some miniatures that I've made. I need to do him, and I want to do this particular lord because he was there. And could I find his flag? And I'm not that good at. I could do freehand of what basically looks like a fat big bird, can be a lion. So, 3 foot away, doesn't matter. It's like flags, I'm not so hot. And I went through and I found the one company that made this flag, and I looked at it, and then that's when the pedant in me came. I was like, it's wrong. I know it's wrong. And it's not just a little bit wrong. It's completely wrong. Like it's totally wrong. They've got it from like some 18th century guy who's got the same name. It's wrong. So I commissioned my own flags for this for this unit. I chatted to the guy. I drew them out. I measured them, and I loved them. They're on that unit, but it kind of got to that point where I was like, no, for this time I'm going to make sure that's that. And I'm waiting for the comments to come back and go, I think you'll find according to this book, and I'm going to no. Do you know what? I went to the British Library, and I know I'm right.
Yeah. Excellent. So let's start wrapping up here. I think we've been at it for an hour and a half, and I'm sure your voices are going, and you probably want to go to bed at this point as well, anyway. But so
not even done part one on my podcast at this time.
Oh, well, now, yeah,
we had to come back, didn't we? We had to come back for those. It was a saga. I think it is.
Yeah, well, we're a bit more professional here at Stormers. Just saying. That goes my monetization. So in sum, then, give me your elevator pitch, both of you, for historical wargaming, for anybody that just to wrap up. What are the top 3 things out that you can sell it to somebody in 10 seconds? You got longer than 10 seconds. I'm joking, but there you go. I'll put you on the spot there, haven't I?
You have, mate.
Yeah.
And it's hard to quantify. I've had so much fun. I mean, I think number one, I'm still doing it 44 years after I started doing it.
Mm-hmm. That's longer than Martin's been alive.
That is by 4 years. 1980 you started, I see. I've had, to build on that, I've had more fun and made more friends historical wargaming than I did in any other form of wargaming or tabletop gaming. And I've also feel like I've contributed more to the community, not just through the YouTube channel, but through gaming and ideas, and just meeting just like-minded people through historical gaming. I think that the community is very strong. Like any community, there's going to be a certain percentage of them, but you're going to get that anywhere, and I think that the community on the whole is a great one, and I think it's very supportive. So I think that's a really good reason to get into it.
Yeah, I'd second that as well. You know, it's. I think certainly. I think it's a lot better now. But certainly, when I was younger, I kind of led two lives. I had the wargamer life and the not wargamer life, and I didn't talk about the two in the same places. But it's a lot better now. And you know, like Martin says, with anything, there are good and bad, but the vast majority of people involved in wargaming are good, friendly, lovely people and you know, I'm amazed quite often at how people will give their time up to help you for free. A lot of the time with, you know, painting tips, basing tips, whatever. You know, you get 10p a month or whatever from your YouTube channel, but you know, you're not doing it for money. You're doing it to showcase the hobby. So I think there's a lot of generosity out there in what people do and what it brings to it. And you don't always see that in other hobbies. You can get, and there's a competitive side to wargaming as well. But some hobbies are really, really competitive and elitist as well. There's a big argument that wargaming is expensive, and it costs you money. Of course it does.
Yeah.
But it's not that expensive. I always tell the story of my friend who's big into his road cycling, and he spent £4,000 on 2 wheels, and that didn't include the tyres. No, you know, Kylie Minogue didn't come round in lingerie and fit them for him. It was just two wheels for his bike, $4,000.
No.
That's a shitload of money.
That's several armies, even armies at your size, Ken. That is, isn't it? Really, that is, you know, that's a lot of figures. All right, guys. Is there anything else you want to say to wrap up here? I mean, anything else you want to add to what you've already said?
Subscribe to me, Yorkshire Gamer.
I was going to say that, Ken, but I won't now. Yeah. Well, I think we covered quite a lot of ground there. I think you know, I think that we've well, you two have at least, you know, you've argued the cause for historical wargaming, and I think, you know, that if there's anybody that is watching this that hasn't tried it, I definitely think, you know, they should be jumping in and just having a go at least. You know, dip a toe in. Yeah, because it is a big pool. Some of it's murky, not all of it. You know, some of the shallow end is quite nice.